Of course, Senator Schumer. I was just saying that you've been a fearless champion for student loan borrowers, authoring Resolution 100 to cancel student debt by administrative action. And all of the partners and the over 457 people that care about student loan debt are so happy to have you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Natalia. I can't see who's speaking here because you have your little sign in the way. Is that you, Natalia?
Yes, that is me.
Great. Well, thank you for doing the great job you're doing. And I want to thank everybody, now 466, it's gone up, participants on this call. A special shout out to the NAACP, to the student debt crisis, to the Center for Responsible Lending, for NextGen America, for the Young Invincibles and Generation Progress. We are a team and we are going to get this done. Failure cannot be an option. It's just too important. And I am excited to be around so many individuals that are passionately fighting for a solution to this debt crisis. I wear my Cancel Student Debt mask, which you're seeing there on your screen, on the Senate floor and to many important gatherings so people see how important it is. And we all know, well, how did we get to this mess with student debt? Well, for much of American history, education and college, graduate school has been a ladder up. But for too many people these days, student debt has been the anchor weighing them down, making it harder to start a family, harder to buy a home, to plan a career, and so much more. The pandemic has stressed student finances even closer to the breaking point. So it was bad enough before, it's worse now. And pursuing a post-secondary education is becoming a luxury for many of our students, particularly in communities of color. Taking out student loans has been the interim solution for many, not realizing the forever burden it would leave behind. You know, growing up, my family was middle class. My father was an exterminator. When I went to college, I struggled to pay my way through. But in those days, I was able to get out with no debt. And without the constraints of paying off a mountain of debt from school, I was able to pursue my dreams. Had I had this load of student debt, I wouldn't be where I am today. Absolutely. I wouldn't have even run for office at the young age of 23 because I would have had this debt burden. Today, unfortunately, Americans owe $1.7 trillion in student loans. More than 9 million borrowers are in default. And this crisis keeps growing and growing and growing. It's keeping more and more young people from building businesses, starting families, buying homes. It's contributing to the racial wealth gap. This is a racial justice issue. Since Black and brown communities are shouldering the burden of student debt so disproportionately, the average Black borrower owes more than 100% of their loan balance, even after 12 years of college. Half of Black borrowers and a third of Latino borrowers default on their loans in that same time. So this is a big, big problem. One of the biggest problems America faces. The question is, what can we do about it? Senator Warren and I, along with many of our colleagues in the Senate and House, as you know, have proposed canceling up to $50,000 in student debt through executive action. President Biden can do it with the flick of a pen. And we use the Higher Education Act to do it. And previous presidents have successfully done it. This isn't the first time. It's a larger amount of debt that's been canceled, but debt has been canceled in the past by executive action. It would not only, what we're proposing would not only provide immediate relief to millions who are struggling through the recession, would be a huge shot in the arm for the economy, providing massive consumer-driven stimulus. When kids don't have to, young people and middle-aged people don't have to pay off $300, $400, $500, $600 a month, they can use it to buy a car, to buy a home, to go on a vacation, etc. So it's so important. The Biden administration has taken some steps. We appreciate those to extend relief to student borrowers, directing the Department of Education to suspend payments for student loans and freezing the interest rate at zero. If they can do that, they can go further. It's the same executive authority. And let me say this, the Biden administration is still today very much open to what we are doing. No question about it. And in fact, Senator Warren and I and Congresswoman Presley and a few others are planning to meet with the president again shortly to reiterate our claim. This is still going and going strong. It's one of the biggest challenges the administration has said they faced is, well, people will still have to pay tax when we forgive it. No more. Along with Senator Menendez, Senator Warren and I, in the last ARP bill with so many other good things, also said you don't pay tax when your debt is forgiven. So that argument is against it. We still need millions of people, you, your friends, your families, everyone is part of your organization, to email, to write, to call the White House and say, please do this. We need to succeed. We're pushing the administration to take bold action, cancel student debt. We need your help. Legislators are analyzing the number of borrowers, the amount that's owed, the number of borrowers in default. But that's not the only factor. We need your voices, your calls, your emails, your tweets. This issue has really, people know what it's all about. We just need more to do that. So I call on everyone on this Zoom, Natalia, to take action and join us. Use your voice, speak up, take up the whole room. Get all your friends and family and neighbors to talk about how student debt impacts so many daily lives. Describe what your life would be like had you had your debt canceled, Speak out now. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate everyone's effort. We are going to fight and fight and fight until we win. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Senator Schumer. We are going to do this. We are going to cancel the debt. And it's because of champions like you and so many other in Congress, but also because of these voices. We have over 512 people. We have maxed out this Zoom completely. This is also live streaming on YouTube. We are getting the word out far and wide. And already 6,800 people have shared their stories, and more are coming in as we are speaking. So we'll make sure to get those stories to you, Senator.
Thank you,
and
Natalia.
Just appreciate that your time on behalf of all of the great organizations that have joined us today.
Thank you. On to victory. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Wow, I am fired up. What a wonderful guest. And thank you to all the organizations that are helping to make this Zoom possible. So now I'd like to introduce our all-star panel. We have Justin Atkins. Justin, are you there?
Hey, Natalia, I'm here. And let me just say on the record, an appreciation for Senator Schumer's fight in this effort. I am willing to yield my time to him anytime.
Thank you, Justin. And we also have Russell Boyd, the National Field Organizer for the NAACP Youth and College Division. Russell.
Thank you, Natalia. It's a pleasure to be here. And much like Justin, I am more than happy to yield my time anytime for such a great message and for someone who's actively championing for this really important issue. So I'm so glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to the great conversations we're going to have today.
Thank you. Us too. And we rounding out our panel, we have Whitney Barkley Denny, the works at the Legislative Policy Council at the Center for Responsible Lending. Whitney, do we have you on the line as well?
I'm here, and I want to also thank Senator Schumer and also all of this amazing chatter I see going on in the chat. Y'all, we want to hear from you. Please fill out the survey so that we can record those stories and get your pictures and get those over to Senator Schumer if you haven't done that already, because I'm seeing some really compelling stuff coming up in the chat.
And last but certainly not least, Charlotte Hancock, Senior Director of Communications and Digital Strategy at Generation Progress, and also works at the Higher Ed Not Debt campaign as well. Charlotte?
Thanks so much, Natalia. Excited to be here, excited to be featured with so many wonderful organizations who've been doing so much work on this for such a long period of time. And really, as Whitney said, grateful to the student loan borrowers who are sharing their stories, because as she mentioned, this is really a fight that's been led by the borrowers, and we're not going to see the change until we get those voices to people who can make decisions and change policy. So really grateful for all of you, and grateful to be, able to speak with so many borrowers directly right now.
Absolutely. And if you haven't shared your story yet, Cody, who's also from our team, is sharing a link in the chat for you all. We encourage you to share your story. We've made an easy form for you to fill out to help guide you along, and plenty of open fields so you can just express yourself the way you are in the chat and letting us know what you're going through. And with that, Justin, can you give us, an overview of what's going on? Why are we here today to cancel student debt? I know we're in a student debt crisis. What are you hearing from people impacted by debt, and why is this such a crisis?
Yeah, Natalia, this is a crisis. We are in a crisis right now. We are dealing with a failed system of student debt, that has essentially put about 70% of, college graduates in student debt. It's a system where apparently Americans have about $2 trillion of combined student debt. Natalia, that's $2 trillion that's not flowing through our economy right now, It's a failed system, but even beyond it being an economic issue, it's a moral issue too. We're talking about young people graduating college where they had these hopes of getting ahead with their education already being set back, entering into the marketplace, the working marketplace, with already having hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of student debt already on top of them, a mountain. It's a system that is virtually impossible to come from under for a lot of Americans. And this is why it is such a significant issue that we need to address and take care of now. Beyond a moral issue, it's a public health crisis, right? I can't even tell you how many borrowers we've talked to who've shared their stories with us that go back and forth battling with, mental health and depression. I was just recently talking to someone that was just feeling really down because they are still trying to pay off their student debt as their children, their adult children, are entering college and starting to take on that student debt, right? And so we're dealing with a big crisis in this country right now. But not just folks that have graduated college who expected to have this degree and get ahead but couldn't. We're also talking about people who started college and didn't finish and don't have that credential or that diploma and still can't get ahead and have an even harder time, right? This affects so many families. It affects so many people. It's cross-sectional and multi-generational. Just like I said, you've got grandparents and parents and children entering college, adult children who are all still paying student debt and taking on student debt. When we go back a little bit, we're also looking at a more bigger issue. We've got a huge wealth gap problem in the United States. We've got a racial wealth gap. We've got a gender wealth gap. And if you really care about this, if you really care about racial equity, if you really care about gender equity, then this is the solution. And you want to come to a solution, this will jumpstart that by closing some of that wealth gap. And we got to start with $50,000 of student debt. That is the best way to have the most significant impact to really start dealing with some of these issues, to start dealing with that public health issue, to start dealing with the economic, the oral, and the wealth gap issues in this country. I can't think of a better way and a more important purpose to be here than to start really heading in and closing that gap on student debt right now.
Absolutely. Senator Schumer said the same thing, that, we've been hearing it's not going to completely end the racial inequality or completely close the gap, but it's a huge step forward. Russell, we've talked a lot about this. Can you speak to who is being the most impacted with student debt and the types of communities that we're seeing that are dealing with this crisis?
Absolutely. And, I think that both Justin and Senator Schumer talked about this as well as, the student debt crisis is a racial equity issue. It is. Black borrowers and borrowers of color are most impacted by these issues, feeling the brunt of going through a system, an education system that is rooted in historical racism, whose operations and whose systems and whose structures, whose funding mechanisms are rooted in racial inequality, having to already go through that and feel the burdens of that for so long, so deep-rooted and so historical, and still feeling that to this day, Black borrowers having to borrow from a weaker economic base. I think about myself, who I sit here at about to be 25 years old with $105,000 of student loan debt, worrying, concerned about how am I going to pay this off? Also taking care of a sick parent, trying to do so, also trying to buy a home and to even survive day to day, having that stress and anxiety. Much like myself, many of the peers and many of the young folks that I work with around the country are also feeling that same burden, having to say, am I going to pay my light bill this month? Or am I going to, save for student loan debt? Because many of them understand that while yes, there isn't a pause right now on repayment, that's only a pause and that it's temporary. And if that we don't get ahead of this, if we don't actually take bold and radical change to start pushing towards this issue, that many of them will fall back into the same traps, to the same level of instability that they once were before the pause. And I see it every day of folks having to not only feel the grunt of what it means to feel Black and of a person of color in America, with everything going on from the COVID crisis to the policing crisis, of having to feel those burdens, but also feeling the economic burdens as well. So every day, Black borrowers and borrowers of color are feeling this and are feeling the disproportionate impacts of that. Our borrowers who attend HBCUs, I have tons of friends and colleagues and peers who attend HBCUs that are underserved and underfunded, and especially during COVID, not being able to effectively support their students at the same way that their counterpart at white institutions or more afloat institutions are able to. Having to have our stories not be as vocal and as censored because we didn't have a traditional background. Again, myself, I'm a first generation college student. I was 17 years old trying to figure it all out. My parents had no idea what it was. They knew they wanted to support me of going to college, but they didn't recognize everything that we would have to put ourselves through. And I'm feeling that today. And I don't want another young person. I don't want another young Black borrower. I don't want another person having to feel those same things. So as we sit here today and we continue to push for the $50K in student debt cancellation, we continue to push further beyond that, and also to build a system that is debt-free, to build a system that's equitable, that works for all borrowers, that works for all students. So folks feel as though I can go to school, I can graduate, I can feel as though I can move up the ladder. I can have this access to whatever we deem as the American dream. But for so many of us, especially Black borrowers, that is not the case at the moment. And a lot of us don't see that in sight. And a lot of us whom are 60 and 65, our grandparents who had the opportunity to attend school, haven't been able to receive that. As Senator Schumer said, Black borrowers are still paying off the same balance after all of these years, still paying off the same balance, not having that same opportunity to even say, use the degree to be able to say, I want to pursue another one because I want to be a member of society that's contributing in so many ways, having my talent, my skills, my expertise be highlighted in my professional career, but can't do so because they're afraid to take out the loans. They're afraid they're not going to be able to pay them, or to even while they're in school to have that support day to day to even get by economically. So that's just the issue on the surface. And I can talk about this all day, but, as we all continue to work together to share our stories, to advocate, to push our elected leaders and officials to really take bold and substantive change to really push this issue forward. I say this, there is no compromise on debt cancellation. Period. There is no compromise. The time for this is now, and it's long overdue. And education and debt cancellation, these things cannot be an afterthought and a conveniency just for election season or whatever the case may be. It has to be always a part of the proactive foundation of how we move and how we build a system that works for all people. So I thank you for this opportunity to share, and I'm so happy that folks are sharing their incredible stories and continuing to push this issue forward.
Russell, I thank you for your insight. You hit on so many great points. One, we know this is affecting young people, and this is, you mentioned, affecting people of all ages. We see the fastest growing group of people over the age of 50. I can't help but think when you and Justin and Senator Schumer are talking about the, racial wealth gap, the gender wealth gap, that, when President Johnson worked on the HEA, the intention was for, more people than just the wealthy to go to college. And it's so sad to see, 50, 60 years later, it completely be the opposite, right? It's actually hurting so many of the same people it was meant to help. And so that's, I agree, at Student Debt Crisis, we are fighting for debt, cancellation, cancel student debt. It's our #1 hashtag. We want to make sure that we, not just cancel the debt, take care of the overall system. And I think that was really important that you hit on that. Since so many of us are here today to talk about, canceling student debt, we brought on Whitney. And, Whitney, I'd love for you to share with folks, how are we going to cancel the debt? And, how is that mechanism going to work? And why is it so important to cancel student debt?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Natalia. Well, you actually set it up perfectly when you were talking about the intention of the Higher Education Act. And I'm going to read this verbatim because I want everybody to hear it and think about what this means. The purpose, as stated by Congress, of the Higher Education Act was to keep the college door open to students of ability, regardless of socioeconomic background. And I bet if we were able to bring everybody onto the screen and ask them if we think that the Higher Education Act has lived up to that purpose, if higher education loans are fulfilling that purpose, we would get a resounding no. And so what we really have here is a program that is not fulfilling the purpose that Congress created it for. So what do we do about that? Well, right in the Higher Education Act, there is authority. Congress has given the secretary the authority to what we call compromise authority in the HEA. And that means that the Secretary of Education really has the ability to enforce, pay, and here's the important part, compromise, waive, or release any rights that he has to collect student loan debt. And so what we are actually asking for is an executive order from the Biden administration telling the Secretary of Education, Secretary Cardona, to do exactly that, to release the debts and release the obligations of people who are paying student loan debt. Now, I've seen a lot of chatter in the chat about who this would actually affect. So, as we're talking about this, as those of us panelists on here and those of us who are pushing for it, we are asking for broad-based, widespread student loan debt cancellation. So it doesn't matter if you're a Parent Plus borrower, it doesn't matter if you're a graduate school borrower, we think that you should be treated the same. And that's really how we're going to get to this equity question. The Department of Education and the Biden administration have made racial justice and racial equity a key part of their platform in their election. And we need to hold them to that. And we need to make really clear that if they're going to fulfill that, then part of this is canceling federally held student loan debt. And yes, I just saw somebody ask, would it include Parent Plus loans? We do believe that it should include Parent Plus loans. There are some more difficult legal questions with some of the other types of loans that are out there, particularly those loans that have been sold or private loans. The department doesn't have the power to cancel those. But for every loan that the department does have the ability to cancel, we are calling on them to use an executive order to do so. I'm happy to get more into sort of the mechanisms of it. But I think the most important thing is something that actually Senator Schumer said, so he kind of preempted my speech on this. But the department has already used this power, right? They used it in the CARES Act and later in the HEROES Act to put a pause on payments and then to extend that pause. And so all we're asking them to do is to continue to use the power that they've already noted that they had, that the Trump administration noted that they had in doing those payment extensions, and use it to cancel student loan debt.
Yeah, I think that's so important that this has been done before. This has been done by the Obama administration, by the Trump administration, by Biden. This isn't something new, but we can do it so fast. As Senator Schumer said, a flick of a pen, tomorrow it could be signed. That's why we are going that route. It's very important to do that. We think, the Center for Responsible Lending and so many other great organizations that have done, the hard work and research to help us really, back up this argument that yes, in fact, canceling student debt would help a variety of issues. The economy, as Justin said, a moral issue, and definitely with this equity issue. But we can't, just cancel student debt. We have to fix the entire higher education system, which is a really big task to take on. But we know we have a lot of young people and parents on that are looking to put their, children through college. We have Charlotte Hancock on. Charlotte, can you talk to us about, what's on the horizon with free college? And Thank
Sure,
you.
of course. Yeah, thanks, Natalia. Thanks for the question. So as many of my smart colleagues have already mentioned here, there is clearly a fundamental misunderstanding in this country about who student loan borrowers are. Like as Whitney was saying, and as other folks were saying, looking at the chat here, it's clear that borrowers are fighters, but they should not have to be. You should not have to be. The cost should never have been prohibitive to anyone pursuing higher education. And no one should be saddled with a lifetime of student loan debt. And the fact that millions of Americans are, like across race and class, but particularly Black and brown borrowers and low income borrowers, is a shameful testament to the broken promise of education as a powerful tool to achieving the American dream. So what we need here is for the administration and Congress to at least start by doing two things. So in order to right these wrongs of promises broken and to ensure we don't end up back in a student debt crisis, we need a comprehensive solution that features broad-based student debt cancellation, as we've been talking about here, including resolving outstanding borrower defense claims for all of the economic, moral, and the racial justice reasons that many of my colleagues have already listed ahead of me here. And the other thing that we have to do is make sure that no one ever again has to go through what borrowers today are experiencing. So the country has to reinstate the promise that the American dream with free college. And this time we have to make it accessible to everyone without barriers to equity. And so these two solutions are kind of two sides of the same coin, and they have to go hand in hand. So I would say the first step toward addressing the broken promise of a higher education system that works for all is to ensure that all students can afford a post-secondary credential and the kind that works for them without the burden of debt or financial hardship. So we're going to ask both Congress and the administration to be bold in supporting ways to end the debt cycle. Young people and people across the country need access to debt-free college that supports student costs past tuition, not just tuition, and that makes progress towards eliminating funding equities between 2- and 4-year colleges. We need people to be able to access community college if that's what they want to do. We need people to be able to access 4-year colleges if that's their choice. We need to make sure that funding is not a barrier regardless. And I also want to point out here that just as debt cancellation is not a radical idea, free college is not a radical idea. We did used to have a system that highly subsidized higher education for white people in this country, right? And today, the root cause of the student debt crisis is a system that forces students to rely on tens of thousands of dollars in debt. So the good news here is that there are numerous college affordability proposals that address the cost of college. We have prominent college affordability proposals on Capitol Hill that are worth celebrating. We have the Debt-Free College Act from Senator Sanders, which would cover the cost of attendance after a family contribution, prioritizing low-income students. And we also have Senator Schatz's College for All legislation, which covers tuition at community colleges and tuition at public 4-year colleges for family making up to $125,000. So with these proposals already on the table, it is time for the House and Senate to make good on a plan for future students to make sure that, again, no one ever again has to go through what student loan borrowers are experiencing today. And then on top of that, what we need is a robust federal investment. And so what we need is to have the federal government invest money in higher education, but then we also need to match that with state investment. We need states to make sure that they're providing supports and funding higher education. This has to be a joint project to make sure that it gives us long-term solutions. And we need to double the maximum Pell Grant, and that would be a good start in providing more of those supports for low-income borrowers. And so student loan debt, I mean, as we've all said here, this is not a problem of the elite. The vast majority of student loan borrowers are low and middle class Americans, many of color, who had to go into debt to access a higher education and who can't afford to pay it. So we're really, really excited to be a part of this project with you all. It's going to continue to shore up the work of elevating student loan borrower voices. And I really do think that your voices, the voices of everybody watching us right now and participating in the chat, are going to be the tip tipping point for our leaders. Your lived struggles, aspirations, and your power, your power here deserve to be shared. And I think this effort is really going to do that. So we have to push the administration and our legislators to cover this issue from all sides. We are ready for free college, hashtag free college, if you want to start tweeting about that. We are ready to cancel student debt. You already all know that hashtag. So we have not yet, if you have not yet filled out the survey, please do so now. You can find it featured on jedprogress.org and also all of the websites and social media pages of all the organizations on this call. And now, Natalia, if I can hand the mic over to one of our student loan borrowers as well, I would love to introduce, my pleasure, my honor, to now introduce Sabrina Calasanz, a first-generation American and a recent graduate impacted by student debt. She is also a student loan borrower who has shared her student debt experience through this project, and she is wielding the power of her story to create change. So thank you so much for joining us, Sabrina. I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you everyone for the opportunity. As Charlotte mentioned, my name is Sabrina, and I am a first-generation American and first-generation college student and a student loan borrower. I graduated in 2019, and once I graduated, I had a hard time finding a job in my field, like many of us, and I struggled to find a sustainable job. And after my grace period of 6 months ended, I had to defer my loans, and I wasn't made aware of any repayment plans. I didn't know what to do. I just knew that I couldn't afford my student loans. And so when I did receive job offers out of state, I wasn't able to accept them because I wasn't able to pay rent on the low salaries and pay off my student loan debt. So student loans were controlling my career choices and controlling the jobs that were available to me. One day, randomly, I filled out a survey that I received in an email about student loan debt cancellation, and I thought this is a really good idea, and I would love to share my story. So I just filled it out, and I didn't really think much of it. And then a few weeks later, I got an email from Cody from Student Debt Crisis, and he asked me to elaborate and talk a little bit more about my story, and so I did. And after doing so, I kind of started attending virtual events and workshops and learning about what options were available to student loan borrowers. And I started listening to the other stories of other people and what they were going through. And I was seeing the disproportionate effect on women and communities of color and low income communities. And that really inspired me to want to speak out and to do something about it. And so I was fortunate to have the opportunity to speak with Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona, President of NAACP Derek Johnson, and Senators Schumer and Warren, and kind of explain the impact that it has had on my life and why I think that student loan debt cancellation is so important to Americans. And I think it's important for all of us to speak out and to share our experiences, to share our stories and not let it shame us and not make it be silent. I think it is important to put pressure on the Biden administration. It's important for us to put pressure on our lawmakers. It is important for us to voice our stories, and our narratives have to shift because we have to center the borrower. We have to stop focusing on just the wealthy Americans. We have to focus on the people who are trying to get an education, trying to improve their lives, trying to help their families. There are people being impacted of all ages. It's not just young people. It's young people, it's millennials, it's older folks, people between the ages of 50 and 64. There are 6.3 million borrowers who still owe student loans in that age, and people who are 65 plus who are getting their student loans removed from their Social Security checks. So there are people that, you know, we have to speak out for them too. We have to encourage them to share their stories. So if you haven't yet, click on the link to fill out the survey, to participate, tweet it out, contact people, you know, reach out to your lawmakers, reach out to your friends, to your family, to someone you may know that has been impacted by it. Try and participate in workshops and listening sessions, because I think when we are informed and educated on the issues and we add that along with taking action, that's when we make the most impact. So I encourage everyone to speak up, share your story, and participate. And I'm sure and hopeful that we're going to be able to cancel student debt and help millions of people who are suffering. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Sabrina. That was perfect. I think you hit on so many great points, and We're so grateful that you filled out that survey and have been sharing your voice ever since, because you're absolutely right. We need to continue to put borrowers first, and that's the whole point of our Cancel Student Debt Voices campaign. And with that, we have some time left over and I see a very active chat. I'd like to introduce Cody Hunanian from our team. And Cody, I believe we have quite a bit of questions for our panel.
Yeah, a lot of folks, obviously they want to get involved. They have questions about their own situation. And, even more importantly, they want to know what is on the horizon when it comes to canceling student loan debt. So let's just jump right in here. A great question from Roberta. And Roberta wanted to know, will retired people and older Americans be eligible to have their loans canceled if one of these proposals passes?
I can take that one if that's okay. Yes, so what we are talking about is an executive order. So President Biden just has to sign the order. It doesn't have to go through Congress, right? And one of the reasons why we want it to not go through Congress is because we want it to be as widespread and apply to every federal student loan debt that we can apply it to. And if we go through Congress, our fear is that, somebody's not going to like this or somebody's not going to like that, and we're going to have to compromise. So the best way to do this is through an executive order that just cancels flat out student loan debt. It doesn't matter if you're paying on a Parent Plus loan. It doesn't matter if you're over the age of 65. It doesn't matter if you're under the age of 25. Your loan debt can be forgiven in this way. And as I said, we have the power to do that through the Higher Education Act. We just need to, give Biden the encouragement he needs to make that choice.
Great. Another question from Mitchell, and Natalia, maybe this is a great one for you because I know we've been talking a lot about this at Student Debt Crisis, but Mitchell asks, after we cancel a large amount of student loan debt, what will be done to fix the system so that we don't have another student debt crisis in the future?
Sure, but I'm also going to pass this off. So, I think we talk a lot about fixing the whole system. We need to cancel student debt, and we need to make sure we don't get into this situation again. And actually, I'm going to pass this to Charlotte, who was talking about that a little while ago. Charlotte, how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again?
Sure. Well, as I said, I think we do really need to shore up both federal and state funding for higher education. What we tend to see, and what we've seen over the past 30 years, is that as states are facing budget deficits, one of the first things regularly on the chopping block is education, particularly higher education. And so when states are disinvesting in their schools, we end up with them pushing that cost onto borrowers. So what we need is for both the federal government and state governments to say, like, you know what, this is a priority for both of us. This is something we really want to make sure happens. We want to make sure that this is a promise we're going to keep to the American public. And at this point, reinstate for the American public, because it has been broken, as evidenced by the crisis, and put these things hand in hand to make sure that there are incentives on both sides to keep that funding level high. And when we have that funding and when we have that cost back in the hands of the federal government, as opposed to pushed into the hands of the borrowers and pushed onto the borrowers, as it has for so many people over the past 30 years, we'll end up with a system that is much more affordable, much more accessible, and in a place where people are not forced to sort of decide whether or not they can go to college because of financial reasons. It's something that should be accessible to everyone, regardless of financial reasons, if that is something that they would like to pursue.
Absolutely, Cody. I'm sure we have some more questions.
Yeah, there's a ton of them here. I'm going to toss this one to Russell because, Russell, I loved your great energy, particularly, the idea that we should not compromise on canceling student loan debt. This is, a non-starter, non-negotiable. We have to go this far. I saw Danielle ask in the chat, what do you feel is the current resistance, if any, to big transformative change like canceling student loan debt, and how can we overcome it?
You know, I think we overcome it by, in the NAACP, we're a firm believer in the power of people. We're a membership-based organization, and we believe that people are power. And we recognize that when we have community buy-in, when we have opportunities like this to share our stories and to understand this as an issue that not only impacts us in individual silos, but as a American and global collective, we recognize that this is a critical need for us to address. We recognize it as a public health crisis, as a racial equity issue, as an economic issue. We recognize it in so many ways, and we continue to drive home those points to where student debt becomes what it is now, not just some radical idea that's on somebody's t-shirt in a coffee shop. It's an actual conversation. It's actual substantive policy recommendations. It's people actively advocating for a system that's debt-free, a system that works for all people, a system that's equitable, a system that's righting the wrongs of a lot of people. I'm seeing so much in the chat. Folks who said they've been suffering for years, 20 and 30 plus years of being swallowed by debt, of being swallowed by something that they were told their entire lives: go to school, get an education, have the opportunity of obtaining the American dream, being able to buy a home, being able to take care of your family, to have as a savings account. We're told all of those things growing up, and we believe that. And we have kids, and we tell our kids the same thing, yet are met with an economy that's underemploying, that's underpaying, that's met with tons of debt, interest rates out of this roof, public of service providers that are not flexible, that are looking to prey on us, to prey on us every single day. I'm knowing people who are paying $1,200 and $1,500 a month just in student loans before the rent is paid, before there's food on the table. So I think when we have the opportunity to have spaces like this where we talk about those things, we talk about the real reality of the impact of student debt, that's how we push the issue. We recognize it of, yes, I may have $5,000 in student debt and this person may have $100,000 in student debt, but the reality is that we both have student debt. The reality is that we're both impacted by this issue, and it's going to continue to impact us, and we're going to continue to be in this whirlwind of an inequitable education system, of inequitable economics, if we don't as a collective address this as a whole. And I think what the resistance is that when we inform the people of their power, when we tell them this is the power that you have of the people, that makes people feel uncomfortable. That makes those in power be uncomfortable. When people then have access, when they're included, when they have the opportunity to pursue the American dream, to buy homes, to take care of their families, to not have to rely on just getting by day to day, that shakes people who are ill-intended and who are in power. And that's just me being very frank. So I think that's what the resistance is. But the reality about resistance is that it comes from both ends. People can resist student debt cancellation, but we can resist the call for people not to cancel student debt. We push back on that. That's what we do. We work as a collective, as an American, as a global collective, to really push this issue forward. I know for me that for the first time in a very long time, I see debt cancellation as possible. I can feel it. I can feel as though that it is something that I can wake up to in the next week or so and read a CNN headline and it says, debt is canceled. What next? I can see that. And I'm ready for the what's next. I'm ready to be a part of this fight of where we recognize we've canceled debt, but now we build free college. We build consumer protections. We make sure that folks have access to opportunity, that people are on college campuses and they have the resources that they need to be successful, that folks who are first generation college students don't have to worry about what it means to fill this out, or can they do this, or are they going to be able to go to this great school. The HBCU students who want to be a part of their cultural and familiar legacy, who want to pursue that type of education, have the opportunity to not only afford it, but can be there and can be successful and can graduate and use those beautiful talent and skills and expertise to really contribute to our economy, to grow themselves personally, to be able to truly be the America that we know that we can be, this land of this land of the free, this home of the brave, this place where you have access to opportunity. We don't have that at the moment. But when canceling student debt and making sure that people have an opportunity to education, and whether that be formal or whether that be vocational or trade, whatever that may be, that folks have access to it and can do something with it and can share it and be a part of it. So I think that's what it is. There's resistance, but we can also meet with resistance, and resistance that's actually going to benefit someone. And that's all of us who are impacted by student debt.
Yeah, Russell, I consider that the equivalent of a Zoom mic drop, because I'm seeing folks in the chat who are like, preach, amazing.
Yeah.
Spot on. So I love the energy, and so happy to have NAACP as partners on this project.
Yeah, it's so important, Russell, and I agree. We need to resist and fight back against the people that are anti-debt cancellation, because the biggest thing I'm hearing from people is well, I paid mine or didn't go to college, so what about me ism. And as Senator Schumer, not necessarily today, but many times have said, that's just progress. We want things to be better for the next generation every year than the year before that. That's the way life is. So, this is a completely progressive issue. And I thank you for everything you said. Cody, I think we
just wanted,
oh yeah, go ahead, please.
Just really quickly, I wanted to say, Russell said something that really resonated with me, which I know several of us in this panel have been in this fight for a pretty long time now. I know I'm coming up on a decade in working on student loan issues. And I want to tell everybody in the chat, 5 years ago, this was not a conversation. Nobody, when we tried to talk about this 5 years ago, people said, get out, you're crazy. There's no way it's ever going to happen. Let's focus on fixing other things. And so the fact that we're here is incredible. And it's what makes me believe. And like Russell, I actually do wake up thinking maybe today will be the day. I better get a text message and not just see it on CNN, given how long I've been working on this. But maybe today will be the day that we see this happen via executive order. So, don't give up, keep fighting and keep pushing, because I really think that it's going to happen, and it's going to happen soon.
Whitney, such a great point. Charlotte and I have been working on this for 7+ years. I too am nearing over a decade, and I never thought we would be here, but that speaks to the voices, that speaks to all of you sharing your stories. Student debt crisis got started based off of a petition and a story collection, and that was all we were. And it took us 4 years to get 1 million signatures to fight for debt cancellation starting in 2010. And it took us less than 4 months last year to get to over 1 million signatures. That's how much the energy is just growing. And again, it can't be done without this wonderful collaboration of, so many different groups, diverse voices, young, old, making sure that we're highlighting, the communities of color that have been suffering and so impacted by this crisis. It's a dream come true for those of us that have been working in this space for so long, but we know we're not there yet. No one's popping champagne bottles. We're not celebrating yet, but I agree with Whitney and with Russell. Tomorrow could be the day, and this year can definitely be the year that we can get this done. Cody, some more great questions for our panel?
Yeah, I want to toss this one over to Justin, because I know the folks at NextGen America are organizing on many fronts. And we had a question here from Edric, and Edric was saying, student loan debt's not the only issue impacting Americans today. They're concerned about voting rights. I know a lot of the folks we speak to are also concerned about healthcare reform. They're all connected though. And so, Justin, I'm curious to know, how do you see the student debt crisis as being an intersectional issue with many of the other crises we're facing today?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, we've got a big healthcare problem in this country, about affordable healthcare, access to healthcare. And as we're hearing more and more people talking about just how mentally draining being in student debt is, and how their lack of access to get to a provider to get that assistance, right? And so we know that taking action on student debt is going to, in some way, eliminate some of the problems we have in other areas. We're talking about voting rights here. We're talking about people having a voice, being able to have access to electing those people to represent them in this democracy, to kind of stand up for them on this fight on student debt. I mean, as you can see, we have a representative government that doesn't 100% agree that student debt needs to be canceled, but folks can have a voice on that. Young people specifically have showed out in record numbers, in 2020 alone. Young people have showed us that even through all these issues, student debt has been at the top of it forever. We've got not just younger people, but generational folks as well. And I just want to add to something as well, something that, Russell kind of mentioned, and Whitney as well. You all talked about, your story, with student debt and how you're, handling student debt right now. And I just want to say, I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm one of the lucky ones that don't have student debt, right? And I'm fortunate to be in that position because I'm a veteran. I use my GI Bill. And I want to preface this by saying that there are many reasons why someone should choose to serve their country or join the military, right? Being compelled to join the military to earn an education should not be one of those, right? And so when we're talking about resistance against canceling student debt, Why would you care? People often ask me, Justin, you don't have student debt. Why do you care about this issue? I care about it because I'm empathetic towards this issue. I care about it because it's what's good. It's what's best for the collective good. There was another veteran in here in the chat that was saying like their daughter paid 600 plus. It's because it's the people we care about. We don't want to see our parents and grandparents retiring still in student debt when they're usually living on a fixed income already, but then already having to pay hundreds and sometimes thousands of dollars each month in a student debt. So in order to make that happen, we need to make sure that we have equitable access to the ballot box. We need to make sure we're removing barriers. I know we're talking about student debt right now, but other issues that intersect with this that we're fighting for are also voting, democracy reform, voting rights reform. We're talking about, the For the People Act right now. That would be a huge shift in elections for America, giving, many more people access to elections. So making sure that, we're tuned in to what's happening with student debt, but also the impact that some of these other policies and pieces of legislation going through Congress right now can have on student debt and our ability to have access to the ballot, to actually have a voice, a bigger and more broader voice, and making sure that what we need done also happens.
That's spot on. Yeah.
And Justin, just to add, I would say not only are you lucky when not being a borrower, but you're also a lucky veteran. Unfortunately, student loan debt doesn't discriminate whether you're a veteran or not. And we know so many veterans that, especially that attended for-profit schools, that were impacted. And, something so insidious to hurt, our best and brightest that are fighting for our country is, yet another reason to cancel student loan debt. So, I just want to say, thank you to everyone that has been on this panel and to this really lively, group on Zoom, everyone participating. We had over 500 people on this Zoom and are just grateful that you're going to share your story. I want to stress that student loan debt is parent debt. It's graduate debt. We are inclusive of all of that. It's just unfortunately the name it is, and often so many parents can feel left out, but we want to hear from all of you from all walks of life and highlight your stories. As you heard, we will share them with Senator Schumer, and if you're comfortable with it, we will share it with your lawmakers and anyone and everyone who will listen, because collectively we are going to be able to cancel this debt. And it's because of the folks that you see here on the call and all of you out there that are helping us in this fight. So just a really special shout out to Justin Atkins from NextGen America, Charlotte Hancock at Generation Progress, Whitney Barkley Denny from the Center for Responsible Lending, Russell Boyd with NAACP Youth and College Division, and also a special thank you to Young Invincible, another partner that is helping us collect stories and generally be a part of the Cancel Student Debt Voices campaign. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. As Charlotte mentioned, you can go to any one of our social media handles or use the link provided to you in the chat. We want to hear from you, and just thank you all, and thank you all to our speakers.